Well, for more, we can bring in our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert, who's with me here on set. Now, Doug, first of all, after a decade in office, just what progress has Kim Jong-un made so far?
Certainly not the progress that perhaps some North Koreans had been hoping for. Look, we'll all remember, a lot of us remember those images of North Koreans wailing incontrollably on the streets of Pyongyang, the capital, 10 years ago today at the death of Kim Jong-Il, Kim Jong-un's father, and was part of this state-mediated, orchestrated public grieving for the death of the second Kim. After the grandfather founded the dynasty, Kim came to power, Kim Jong-un, very young, 27 years old, inexperienced, and yet it was his youth that made people think, maybe there will be some sort of systemic change. Maybe there'll be some generational change here. Instead, there's no real way of boiling it down other than to say his legacy 10 years later, a decade later, is one of brutal repression, purges, executions, food insecurity, suffering, political camps, political prisoners. The list goes on and on. It is a litany of absolute grievance wherever you look. Now, you mentioned nuclear tests, and it's true. I want to bring up a little chart here. If you speak to, outside international experts looking in on North Korea, and it's all we ever talk about when we talk about North Korea often, it's the nuclear arsenal, the nuclear ambitions. That is hardwired to every discussion about North Korea. We only talk nuclear weapons, and you can't ignore it. The nuclear arsenal is unchecked. Under Kim, North Korea has staged 4 of its 6 nuclear tests in its entire history. Under Kim Jong-un, about 100 or so or more intercontinental ballistic missiles, including one that North Korea claimed could carry a heavy nuclear payload eventually that could reach the United States. Those tests continue unchecked. Pandemic-induced isolation. North Korea remains under the world's strictest lockdown due to the coronavirus, which has also helped Kim to control both the communications and what comes in and what goes out. But its isolation has been accentuated because of the pandemic. Already the world's pariah country, already the most impoverished, one of the most impoverished, most totalitarian, you could argue, countries in the world. Repression executions I talked about. He began shortly after he came to power, allegedly purging, killing his own uncle. We heard a few years back that his estranged half-brother was also killed in a bizarre scenario at an airport in Kuala Lumpur, also attributed, obviously denied by the Kim Jong-un regime. And finally, this heavy, I say it 3 times, reliance on China, because it's a love-hate relationship. China prays that North Korea remains stable. It doesn't want instability there to pour across the border into China. It's the last thing Xi Jinping wants. At the same time, they are very difficult allies, and there is no love lost, like I said, between Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping, even though most of North Korea's, the vast majority of its very limited international trade is dependent on China.
Doug, Kim Jong-un's high-stakes summitry with Donald Trump, of course, drew lots of attention back in 2018. Have those meetings, though, had any impact beyond those of just flashy photo ops?
No, we're talking about them. It was an elaborate showcasing. It was an orchestrated stage show, and it was a photo op, as you said, driven really mainly by the grandiose egos of the 2 men involved, Kim Jong-un and the former President Donald Trump. Look, before the Trump summit, you had perhaps a more significant opening. You had the first inter-Korean summit between the South Korean president and Kim Jong-un, and that was in April 2018. And they signed a sort of declaration at the demilitarized zone at Panmunjom, perhaps paving the way for some sort of peace overtures and openings, and is the first such summit between the 2 Koreas, the divided Koreas, since 2007. So that was a big deal. Then came all of the what I would say is the pomposity and the orchestrated stage show, and those were the Trump meetings. You had the so-called Singapore summit in June 2018, which led to the so-called Singapore Declaration. What was it? It was a pledge to try to push towards peace and denuclearization, as the U.S. called it, of the Korean Peninsula. That was never going to happen. The nuclear issue is hardwired into the North Korean constitution. Nuclear weapons are what Korea, that's the be-all and end-all for North Korea. Without the nuclear component, it would practically not exist. It would have no foreign policy. They rely on their nuclear weapons. They are not about to denuclearize. Trump and Kim never sought eye to eye on that issue. They had another summit, as we know, in 2019 in Hanoi. That was a failed summit. It fell apart. Talks broke down. The leaders parted early, or Kim Jong-un parted early, and the nuclear talks have been deadlocked ever since. So we're left today, right now, with a policy towards the Biden administration of strategic, yes, diplomacy and confrontation, as he sees it. Kim Jong-un, we're basically back to square one where we started, and his power and his rule shows no signs of subsiding. If anything, he has consolidated power over the past 10 years.
Okay, Douglas Herbert, our international affairs commentator, thank you very much.